Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the World Rural Revitalization Conference. My presentation this afternoon is about sharing insights from social enterprise-led agricultural value chain interventions in Southeast Asia. And I'm hoping that such sharing is going to provide some perspectives on social entrepreneurship, youth, and rural revitalization. My presentation is on social entrepreneurship, rural revitalization, and youth, and I'll be sharing some insights from social enterprise-led agricultural value chain interventions in Southeast Asia. But before that, let me just introduce to you the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia that I found in 2008. The Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia is a learning organization which we set up in 2008, and co-founding this with me were social enterprises, resource institutions, and scholars to undertake research, capacity development, and building of platforms to advance social entrepreneurship for sustainable and equitable development in the region. Our members cover 10 countries in Asia, and we are hosted by the Ateneo de Manila University, John Gokongwei School of Management in the Philippines. Part of the work we do is research, and much of the research we've done is about focusing on social entrepreneurship in developing country contexts. We did a research, for example, in 2015 about poverty reduction and women's economic leadership, roles, potentials, and challenges of social enterprises in developing countries in Asia. And this spanned the Philippines, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and India. We also did another research, which we actually completed this 2019, called A Pathway to Sustainability, Benchmarks for Transformational Partnerships and Women's Economic Empowerment in Agricultural Value Chains in Southeast Asia. And this was a research of best practices of social enterprises and inclusive businesses in agricultural value chains in the sub-region, and covered countries such as the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Much of what I will share with you this afternoon is coming from that research. So the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia also builds platforms. So much of what we research about is what we use to actually strategize and develop platforms to create an enabling environment and ecosystem that would support social entrepreneurship for sustainable development in the region. For example, in the Philippines, we catalyzed the setting up and we convene the Poverty Reduction through Social Entrepreneurship Coalition, which actually is undertaking lobby for the enactment of a poverty reduction through social entrepreneurship law. And we've been doing this since 2012. Also, in response to the development crisis in the region and the COVID-19 pandemic, the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia just launched Women's Empowerment, Livelihoods, and Food in Agricultural Value Chains, a platform that we're hoping would try to change the face of agricultural value chain development in Asia because of its focus on the empowerment of women and men small-scale producers. We're also catalyzing 4 more platforms, including rural revitalization, youth, and social entrepreneurship. And this is being co-convened by TRM and Sources for Action China. All these platforms were actually just launched in a conference that we co-convened with the United Nations Commission on Social Commission on Asia and the Pacific. And the reason why they've co-convened this with us is because there's a recognition of the important role that social enterprises can play in inclusive recovery and building back better. Let me now go to introducing social entrepreneurship in a developing country context. We've done a lot of research in developing countries in Asia, but mainly with those countries that have no socialist history, such as the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, India, and Bangladesh. And we have in this research that we've done since our founding in 2008, we have noted that social entrepreneurship is a response to the development crisis in these various countries. And the development crisis is characterized by economic growth with a deepening poverty and worsening inequality. It's also, social entrepreneurship is also a response to the failure of state and market institutions to actually serve the needs of the poor. And this has given rise to what we have theorized to be social enterprises with the poor as primary stakeholders, or SEPs. What are SEPs? In the context of developing countries in the region, and as I've said, we've done this research mainly in developing countries with no socialist background. We noted that social enterprises with the poor as primary stakeholders are like NGOs because they are social mission-driven organizations. They explicitly pursue poverty reduction and alleviation as a primary objective. The poor are engaged as workers, suppliers, clients, and owners of these social enterprises. And they are actually, the poor are partners in social enterprise and value chain management, governance, or even the pursuit of social change. But unlike NGOs, social enterprises are like businesses because they are wealth-creating organizations. They are engaged in the provision of goods and services, and they have a double or triple bottom line, such as social, environmental, and financial. And financial sustainability is a supportive objective to their social goals. So as I said, social enterprises with the poor as primary stakeholders are like NGOs because they're social mission driven, but they're not like NGOs and are like businesses because they're wealth creating organizations. But unlike ordinary businesses, social enterprises have what we call a distributive enterprise philosophy. They generate positive economic and social value that is distributed to or benefit the poor as primary stakeholders. And the surplus and profits accrue to the poor as dividends. They are used to support activities and services for the poor to overcome poverty, and they're invested and reinvested to fulfill their social mission. Social enterprises are like hybrid organizations traversing what we call a plural economy. We call our economy a plural economy because there are actually many principles that are governing it, not just market principles. And in the world of social enterprises, we see that social enterprises have the dual role of creating ethical markets and strong social and solidarity economies. Plural economy is actually characterized by various forms of exchange. And for example, there is the principles governing the market, which depend on the exchange of goods and services through price setting. But there are two other principles that govern various forms of exchange, which we call redistribution, where part of the production is handed over to a central authority, usually the state, who is responsible for distributing it, and reciprocity, which is based on mutual help, voluntary complementation, and interdependence. Redistribution and reciprocity are principles governing social and solidarity economies. They are not linked to market economies. So when we say that social enterprises are hybrid organizations traversing a plural economy, we look at them as having a dual role of co-creating ethical market economies and building a strong social economy. In a research that we recently conducted, where 200 researchers from 55 countries used bottom-up approaches to capture the phenomenon of social entrepreneurship, we actually were able to come up with a common definition across these 55 countries that social enterprises are responses towards new ways of sharing responsibility for the common good in today's economies and societies. They are responses on the basis of economic and business models driven by a social mission. And in the context of Asia, we have noted that there are three main models of social enterprise. The first is what we call an entrepreneurial nonprofit model. The second, a social cooperative model. And the third is a social business model. So what we usually see on the ground is one of these models or a combination of these models, as you will see in the examples that I will be sharing with you in a while. Let me now go to the discussion on social entrepreneurship for rural revitalization and the insights that we've gotten from social enterprise-led agricultural value chain interventions in Southeast Asia. Let me give you some examples and also share with you the models that they are actually showing. there is this social enterprise in the Philippines called Bote Central, and they're working with the Philippine Coffee Alliance. And TRICOM is a non-government organization, and they actually have a partner indigenous peoples organization called KMDO. And TRICOM and KMDO are actually pursuing a joint venture called SK Coffee Ventures. So the KMDO, or the Kulaman Manobo Dulangan Organization, is a partner indigenous peoples organization of TRICOM and the Sultan Kudarat Coffee Ventures Incorporated. They are engaged in the production, processing, and marketing of Kape Dulangan, their own brand of coffee, to a growing local market as part of their ancestral domain development plan. SKCVI, or the Sultan Kudarat Coffee Ventures Incorporated, is one of the more than 50 community-based coffee enterprises comprising the Philippine Coffee Alliance, led and assisted by Bote Central, with their Coffee for Life program that assists small producers, small coffee producers, not only become producers of coffee beans, but actually processors of coffee and marketers of coffee, which are actually their own brands of coffee. And in this case, Kape Dulangan was their brand, was the brand of the indigenous people, the Kulaman Manobo Dulangan organization, of their brand of coffee. Let me share with you another example. In the Philippines too, there's Alter Trade Foundation Incorporated, and they actually helped in organizing Negros Organic Fair Trade Association. And the Negros Organic Fair Trade Association was actually a federation of small producers that were brought together by Alter Trade Foundation in their intervention in the sugar subsector. And Alter Trade and NOFTA created NOFTA Fair Trade House. And NOFTA Fair Trade House is a trading and marketing arm of this social enterprise system. Alter Trade Foundation Incorporated transformed women and men agrarian reform beneficiaries, who are actually recipients of land from government, into entrepreneurial farmer leaders and members of cooperatives and associations that not only served as supplier communities for sugar, but as vehicles for diversifying their crops and incomes and community development. They were assisted by Alter Trade Foundation to federate into the Negros Organic Fair Trade Association. NOFTA has served as a vehicle of the small farmers to acquire organic and fair trade certification, to negotiate better terms with the sugar mills, to become majority owners of NOFTA Fair Trade House, which is their trading and marketing arm, and to undergo training and planning on climate change and disaster risk reduction, mitigation, and adaptation. A third example I'd like to show you is Dompet Guafa's KMM Limited, which actually helped to organize ISM Sinar Abadi Cooperative. KMM's program called Mustahik Move to Musaki in Indonesia assisted assetless women muscle strippers to become owners of bagans, or the means of production of muscle, green muscles. The bagans are these, what you see in the screen, as bamboo poles that are actually being used to produce green muscles. So anyway, KMM's Mustahik Move to Musaki assisted assetless women muscle strippers to become leaders and members of ISM Sinar Abadi Cooperative. The cooperative is serving as a vehicle for enabling muscle strippers to undertake semi-processing and trading of green muscles. They provide financial and health services to the women. The cooperative also gives opportunities for capacity building and networking, and provides a hygienic workplace for stripping muscles with a playground for their children. Over a period of just 2 years, there was a dramatic transformation of the women from being mustahik, which are receivers of alms or zakat, to muzaki, which are the givers of alms or zakat. A fourth example is an example in Thailand with Oxfam, which actually assisted the Fisherfolk Enterprise, and Fisherfolk Enterprise developed a brand of fish called Blue Brand. And Fisherfolk Enterprise also partnered with Lemon Farm, and Lemon Farm has a participatory guarantee system, which actually works in favor of small producers on the ground. As part of their intervention towards sustainable fisheries, The Association of Thai Fisherfolk Federation, Fisherfolk Enterprise in Thailand, partnered with Oxfam to develop a blue brand of responsibly fished, formalin-free fish. And they established a community-based central processing center where all fresh fish products were prepared, processed, and packaged. They set up a fish processing and slicing group where they trained women fishers to ensure they produce based on the blue brand quality protocols. They sell the blue brand through their fisherfolk shops in Bangkok. But they also sell them through 11 grocery outlets of Lemon Farm. And Lemon Farm is co-owned by 28,000 consumer and producer households, serving as a major market channel for more than 3,000 organic, certified through PGS or Participatory Guarantee System, and natural agricultural products. Now, if you look at all these four examples, you would note that the models actually traverse the three social enterprise models in Asia that I was sharing with you earlier, which are actually entrepreneurial nonprofits. Some of them are social cooperatives, and others are actually social businesses. So in the study that we did, we noted that agricultural value chain interventions that significantly impact on the lives of small-scale producers are strategic partnerships that pursue or promote eight major areas of intervention, or eight major outcomes, pursue major outcomes. The first has to do with pursuing appropriate technology and community-based oriented innovations. The second has to do with the social entrepreneurship intervention, promoting a more substantive share of value created in the value chain to the small producers, rather than just giving them having a share from being small producers because they're moved up the value chain. They're actually getting a more substantive share of value. The third is they actually promote food security and resilience. The fourth is that they empower small producers. The fifth is that they promote stewardship and sustainable consumption and production. The sixth is they promote or provide transactional and transformational services. 7, they promote women's participation and empowerment. And 8, they actually contribute to measurable outcomes of transformation. So these social entrepreneurship interventions that we have noted in these 8 case studies, 4 of which I shared with you, are actually insights for rural revitalization, or how social entrepreneurship can contribute to rural revitalization. Now, the insights I've shared with you, it's not possible for me to discuss all 8 elements that are actually the factors for success of these agricultural value chain interventions. But may I just focus on the aspect of them being programs that actually empower small producers. This empowerment process of small producers is also an agenda for social entrepreneurship for rural revitalization. That's why I'm focusing on this sharing about this with you. But empowerment of small producers, as we noted from the cases, are actually processes that entail 3 simultaneous processes of enabling small producers to own, control, or have access to land, fishing waters, capital, technology, and other productive resources. They also enable them to have power over decision-making processes in households, communities, value chains, markets, local economies, communities, and other relevant arenas of decision-making. And thirdly, they build their capability to sustainably use and manage such productive resources and decision-making processes to improve their quality of life and that of their community and living environments. So what we see as very critical in social entrepreneurship interventions so that they could lead to rural revitalization is the importance of building self-governing institutions of these small producers. The empowerment of these small producers also entails 2 types of services. No? And these 2 types of services are provided by social enterprises by their social enterprises and their partners to small producers in the process of the intervention. These two types of services we called transactional services and transformational services. Transactional services assist small producers to become better workers, better suppliers, better clients. These are roles that involve the exchange of goods or services for money. These roles are actually market-driven. They are driven by what the markets need. However, the other form of service that social enterprises and their partners provide agricultural value chain intervention, provide small producers in agricultural value chain interventions that have been successful in empowering them, are what we call transformational services. Transformational services enable small producers to co-own social enterprises and to become conscious agents of change to improve their position, their quality of life, and that of their community, sector, or society. Now, if you look at the various interventions that I shared with you, the 4 examples from the Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia, you would note that the combination of transactional and transformational services that were provided had to do with, for example, transactional services had to do with capacity building to ensure timeliness of delivery, volume, and quality of products. Organizing these small producers into production clusters is also a transactional service. Providing them improved technology for production is also a transactional service. In the same way that provision of production loans to these small producers are also transactional services. But let's go to the other side. When we talk about transformational services, some of the transformational services that we saw in the 4 examples that I shared with you is about the capacity building on community-based coastal resource management, or even in the case of Alter Trade, community development, visioning, planning, and management, so that the small producers are able to have the capability to plan, to envision and plan what would happen to their communities. It also includes capacity building to lead, own, or co-own social enterprises. And in some cases, they involve ancestral domain development planning and implementation, especially with indigenous communities. They also have to do with planning and implementation of gender and development programs, or even cooperative organizing and leadership development. If you notice this diagram, you see an intersection between the transactional and transformational services, because there are some transactional services that actually have a transformational potential. For example, in the cases that we shared with you, the assistance that the social enterprises provided the small producers to acquire organic, fair trade, and blue brand certification are, in one sense, transactional services. But because they engage the small producers to actually become stakeholders of sustainable consumption and production systems, they become transformational services. The provision of loans, when they're actually made part of a savings and credit program, then that becomes a transformational service. The capacity building to undertake processing and marketing is, of course, a transactional service, but because they actually help to move up the small producers to engage in something that they didn't do before, beyond production, then it becomes a transformational service. So, as some concluding remarks, let me just give you some comments about youth in social entrepreneurship for rural revitalization. Let me first share with you an insight or a concluding remark on social enterprise for rural revitalization. Social entrepreneurship and social enterprise development is catalyzing and could catalyze the transformation of rural communities and the lives of small-scale producers and their households, as you can see from the 4 examples that I've shared with you. At the same time, youth in social entrepreneurship for rural revitalization is all about engaging youth in social entrepreneurship in a process of immersion and learning by doing, which for those of you who are part of the rural reconstruction movement, it's actually what the credo of rural reconstruction is all about. Also, if we talk about the platform for rural revitalization, youth, and social entrepreneurship, the platform that the Sources for Action and the Philippine Rural Reconstruction Movement actually have launched in order for us to engage the youth towards inclusive recovery and building back favor and achieving sustainable development is promoting rural revitalization, youth, and social entrepreneurship so that these can contribute to no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, and reduce inequality, which are the goals 1, 2, 3, and 10 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Decent work and inclusive growth, as well as inclusive and sustainable industrialization and innovation, which have to do with Goal 8 and 9, and responsible consumption and production, as well as sustainable communities and climate action, which has to do with Goals 11, 12, and 13. And finally, gender equality, peace, justice, and strong institutions, as well as partnership for the goals, which have to do with Goal 5, Goal 16, and Goal 17. So I shared with you that Sources for Action China and the Philippine Rural Reconstruction Movement are leading this platform towards rural revitalization, youth, and social entrepreneurship. And it is our hope that by engaging the youth towards inclusive recovery and building back favor, that they can actually work towards contributing to achieving the sustainable development goals, which even before the pandemic was actually deemed as in danger of not being achieved because of the development crisis plaguing many developing countries. Thank you very much.